Another edition of the Terry's Talkin podcast with award-winning columnist Terry Pluto from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com, and me, your host, David Campbell, sports manager at cleveland.com. Terry, this podcast is our baby, and we're going to rock it today. You ready?
Yeah.
Let's get into it. How you doing after the game last night? That was some series.
Yeah, it was. I just enjoyed the last 2 weeks so much, and really the whole season. Once we got to about July, and it's like they might be for real, at least to be interesting. And look, I love baseball, and I've always been a sucker for sort of a younger, developing team. So I admit there's a couple bias right there. But in terms of the entertainment value they gave, and I think it's like kind of unmatched because it was so unexpected.
Yeah, and the way this team played, and this is something they've really cultivated, I think, the way they play with the hustle and the infield hits and the defense and just the scrappiness, I think it really kind of captivated fans this year in a way that nobody was really expecting.
When you win 13 games in your last at bat, and I believe that's a franchise record, that does it too. But the secret to that, along with scoring later in games, is their bullpen was so good, so that if the game was close, they just kept it there, bought their offense time to be able to score. And I think when you looked in the, I believe for the entire postseason, the bullpen only allowed 3 runs at something like 28 innings. It was remarkable.
Well, we've talked about this a lot, Terry, about how good the Guardians are at their jobs, the front office, Terry Francona and his staff. And you're right, it was a remarkable season. But that said, the rawness of last night's loss is still there for fans. And so I wanted to run through a few things and just kind of close the book on some of these things off the series itself against the Yankees. So first of all, there was a lot of debate about whether the rainout was good or bad for the Guardians. Was it unfair? Paul Hoynes, our colleague who was in New York, he wrote a piece about how the Guardians were not happy about how things were dragged on, and the Yankees were like, well, we're going to play and we're not going to play, and MLB was meeting with the Yankees because they're the home team. What did you think of the rainout and whether that mattered?
It probably mattered to an extent, but the thing that MLB should have done, the forecast was terrible. By 5 or 6 o'clock, just bang the game. See, if you do that, then you stop all the who's it being favored or whatever. It's like, look, that map is like a bunch of green and red and orange. You look like somebody threw up on it. Forget it. We're not playing. Then everybody can go back to their hotel and plan. Instead, you keep them there, both teams, because remember, both teams got in there like 3 in the morning. You keep them sitting around the park. They usually get there for 2 or 3 o'clock, if not earlier, for a 7:30 game, and you kept them there till past 10 o'clock, and then you're scrambling for another hotel and everything else. So I fault them just for creating, a logistical mess, and that easily could have been avoided. Did it help the Yankees? Yeah, it gave them another day for Cortez, but the other Talkin, whoever they were going to pitch. I mean, the way the Guardians were hitting all playoffs, it was going to be a challenge for them. The big question is what the Guardians are doing for a pitcher.
Right. Well, let's get into that. So a lot of fans wanted the Guardians to go with Shane Bieber in that game. And pitchers, and especially Shane Bieber, they always want the ball. The Guardians kind of said, listen, you've been through a lot. You've thrown a lot of innings this year. You've had some injury problems in 2021. And they basically just told him, you know what, we're not going to go with you. And it's a very long-term play. And it kind of made me think of the Andrew Miller situation, Terry. During the 2016 World Series, the Indians, as they were called then, rode Andrew Miller as hard as they could, and he took him. He's a large part of the reason they got to Game 7 of the World Series. But then Andrew Miller, he really fell off a cliff after that, and I think his arm was not the same.
And he had a history of arm problems too. To add into. See, that's the thing there you look at on this. I know I'm interrupting, but I want to set the context.
Well, no, I did want to. Go ahead.
I believe Miller had a Tommy John. Certainly, he had a history of arm problems. And remember how his motion was, that sidearm whip-like motion, a little like Clevenger's and that. That's always another red flag. So keep going, but you're really onto something.
Well, I just wanted to throw in real quick, like Andrew Miller, there's a connection there that I made. I don't know that the Guardians made it, but they're thinking long term. Shane Bieber, I think, is under team control for 2 more seasons
Yes.
in terms of arbitration, and so this was not like a 1-season decision. But anyway, what did you think about the decision not to start Bieber, given all that background?
Well, the other guy that they rode that year was not Cody Allen, and he ended up having arm problems too. And by the way, he also had I know for a fact he had a Tommy John while in college. But the other person was Corey Kluber. And if you remember, by game 7, he had nothing, barely a little more than Civale. So it didn't bother me. When you look at the number of innings pitched, Garrett Cole and Bieber had the most in the American League, especially when you count in their 2 postseason appearances. So that's a lot to ask. Now, the question was Bieber versus Civale, and I say, why did it have to be Bieber versus Civale? Why not a pure bullpen game?
Given that the bullpen had pitched extremely well the whole run up and into this series,
and they were all rested. Now that's where one thing that even extra days of rest came in. So I mean, Clase and Stefan, all those guys had not pitched for 2 days because if you recall in the Sunday night game, which I was a little surprised with, he came out with Cody Morris and Eli Morgan and Plesac. So I would not, by the way, start at Plesac. I don't think anyone else would have, but that was the other quote pure starting pitcher. But you could have rolled out there, go with Stefan for a couple innings and some of those other guys that they had. Karinchak, Clase, Morgan could have come back. By the way, Cody Morris was great. You could have tried him. As opposed to a guy who had not pitched for 13 days and had been on the disabled list 3 different times with 3 different injuries. And the thing about when you watch when you watch Civale pitch, you certainly know Emmanuel Clase, but his stuff is marginal. Those slow breaking balls and that kind of thing. I was worried about that. So that is the direction I would have went. Bieber, and if you want to try to sign the guy to a long-term contract, which they are trying to do, you do want to say, look, we do care about you. We didn't just want to wear you totally out.
Well, it's a decision that people are going to be debating all off season, but I think you're right, Terry. The bullpen game might have been the way to go, but you know how baseball is. You make one decision and something else happens, and it could have ended exactly the same way.
If you're not going to score more than one run, it's irrelevant.
That's true.
Although you hate being down 3-0 because it felt like 30.
It did.
That was a tough thing.
I mean, the recipe for success for this team was get a lead, make it a 7-inning game, and then turn it over to Karinchak and Clase.
Or be down 2-1 in those last couple of innings and come back somehow against their bullpen. That was the other way to go. So, it's a tough one, but I'm sitting there going, it's Game 5. They're in the Bronx playing got the Yankees scared to death.
What more can you ask for, right?
Yeah.
Like Tito said, he would have walked to New York if they told him at the beginning
from
of the season.
Goodyear or whatever, we would have done that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at some batting averages now. And the only guys that really showed up in the playoffs were Jose hit 333 and Quan hit 300. Jose drove in 4 runs. I got all 7 games up, by the way. And Quan drove in 2. Oscar hit 226. He had a homer, a 4 RBIs, but the home run won a game, and he drove in winning runs in 2 other games. To his credit, it was amazing. SpongeBob was amazing. In the late innings, he swings at a pitch that's 14 feet outside, and then he almost falls down and lines a base hit up the middle. It was interesting to me how Will Brennan hardly played all year, brought him up late because that was my other guy, and I'm not always this year. I was right on my 2 guys, which were Oscar and Brennan. But in the past, I've been on the Owen Miller, Ben Francisco, that kind of train that barely got out of the station. So it's like everything else, but it's just it was odd. They still were scrambling to try to put together who they wanted to play where, and they just didn't hit. Bottom line.
Yeah, the biggest surprise for me, Terry, last night you mentioned SpongeBob. I thought for sure some fan in Yankee Stadium was going to show up in a Squidward costume.
I
Like he's
tell
like
you,
Squidward's grumpy neighbor who's his
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
his.
Squidward would, yeah. Well, you know what, a Squidward postseason, and this is hard to believe because he was so consistent and so great during the regular season, was Jimenez. He was 5 for 28, but listen to this, David, 14 strikeouts and 28 at bats for him. And then the other guy who was just okay, but the odd thing was the number of strikeouts was Rosario. Rosario struck out 10 times in 29 at bats. He struck out more than SpongeBob did. Um, so, you know, the Yankees probably never want to see Stephen Kwan again. What a pain he is to them. A guy's bunting and he hits a home run, and it just, he's running all over the place.
Long at bats every time, pushing
Yeah,
his bats out
just
into 10,
no. He
12
only
pitches.
walked
Yep.
twice, but it just felt like you're right. He was up there for an eternity, and just he is why Jose is the heart and soul of the team, kind of the symbol of it to the way they want to play is Kwan.
Yeah, and I think Kwan gained some national recognition for just what he's meant to the Guardians too during this series. I think he gained a lot of respect. But
I'm going to roll a little farther with him,
yeah,
and then
sure.
you roll back to taking that team that he was the leadoff hitter, Oregon State, to the College World Series and the title. There was the same thing there. They all talked about how he really was the classic leadoff guy instead of like Aaron Judge leading off or some of these other teams where they do it the leadoff guy. If you could find that guy that's getting on base and hitting close to 300 and he's got some speed, I just think is a tremendous asset. I'm okay with actually batting a power hitter second, but I don't like him leading off. I just don't. I want somebody on base for him, even if he's drawing a walk, because it just makes it a little less likely that guy's going to just pitch around him.
Well, yeah. Let me look what the Yankees do with batting Aaron Judge second.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that strategy there. So you were mentioning Jimenez's stats, Terry, and I wanted to talk about this real quick. For an organization that is good at what they do as the Guardians are in terms of finding every possible statistical way to get an edge, I still can't believe they gave away that out on Jimenez when he was sliding into first.
Yes.
And Rizzo's glove came up short. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody who was watching the game at home within 30 seconds saw the replay and saw that the glove did not touch the bag. And Bob Costas is talking about it. And it made me think of the Browns have somebody up in the press box who's watching this stuff and lets the coaches know whether to challenge or not. And Sandy Alomar, the first base coach, is standing there. He's got to pick up on that. Somebody watching TV in the organization has to pick up on it. They've really got to streamline their instant replay methods and clean that up for next season because they gave away an out there. And I think that was something that they're going to have to look at.
And
what did you think of that?
First of all, you get two challenges. So why not? In the playoffs, you get two. Secondly, remember Sunday night, they challenged two odd plays where they were kind of like lottery tickets and they were wrong. I just thought they just dropped it. I believe they have a guy that's a replay guy there all the games, so I don't know. Francona said they didn't have enough time or something. That just sounded odd.
It did. It's like you're right. They challenged two that they lost, and then the one that was really obvious that they could have won. And boy, you need every out against the Yankees, right?
Right, you're in the middle innings, and you still have one more in your back pocket. Why not?
Yeah, and it needs to happen faster, and it needs to be communicated down to the dugout so they can get a challenge because they gave one away there, and that shouldn't happen. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that, and that's something we'll see if they improve on next season. But
yeah, I'm sure they do, and it would be interesting. I'm going to maybe try to find out this weekend if there was some story behind the story there. In other words, if there was some mechanical glitch or whatever.
Yeah, and it might not have mattered, but you know how baseball is, Terry. You get one guy on, and all of a sudden things start happening, and it gets weird.
You make the reliever throw to another hitter. That's what you're trying to do is wear out their bullpen. And besides, as you said, you get Jimenez on. He can run. He can steal second. I forgot it was coming up after him. I think it might have been Miles, or not Miles. It might have been Hedges or somebody. You're at the bottom of the order, but maybe a pinch hit. You're looking for anything to happen. even winning a challenge lifts the team up. Go, oh, at least something went our way.
All right, and the last thing I wanted to get out there, Terry. So I thought the Josh Naylor rocking the baby stuff after he hit the home run was
Yeah.
really entertaining, and I think baseball needs a little bit more of this kind of just.
Yeah.
It's kind of trash talk, but it's in a fun way. The Yankees didn't like it. They kind of were trolling Josh Naylor after they won Game
Fine.
5 on the last out. The
Right.
fans brought posters. What'd you think of all that?
And Naylor said, well, if you do it, you get, that's how you are. And by the way, Naylor, you've seen him with these flame out moments. He is the nicest guy. He'll talk when things are going well. He'll talk when they're bad. He's very classy. I think it was Andre Knott said, but we got to remember he's from Canada. And he's got that hockey player mentality about him, and which is up your ice, the ice mentality, since you are a hockey referee, among other things. So I thought it was fine. Look, it's genuine for him. You just didn't know. They just said stop headbutting the manager. That was the only rule they had for him. And he plays the game with such enthusiasm and joy. And those who are a little side note, I was watching the broadcast when, remember, I forgot what game it was where he ran down to first base. It had to be one of the ones in New York, and he stepped funny on the bag. And Costas and Ron Darling are going on, yeah, that happens sometimes when you're there and you hit the back. I'm going, his leg is an erector set. That's the one with it's got a rod in there and he screws and bolts. The man shouldn't even be standing up. And they just missed it. I mean, I don't know what kind of research somebody did for them, or they just didn't see it. But it was a critical point because then, by the way, they ended up having to DH him, and they put, I will say this, put Gabriel Arias at first base and go, oh, great, what's going to happen there? And the kid goes 3 for 11. So there you go.
Yeah, and that
But
was a really underrated event in the series. Like
yeah.
if Naylor could have played first,
Mm-hmm.
what would have changed? How would things have changed? And we can wonder about that forever. Arias, I thought, acquitted himself very well,
Yeah, he
as you
did.
just said. But it's baseball, and it's fun to think about that stuff. But anyway, I thought the Naylor and rocking the baby, I thought that was a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
thought
fun.
it was. And he's genuine because he he loves the game. He is it starts with Jose and then goes to Ahmed, but now he's actually played a few years, makes him a little older than there, and he brings that fire too. And you want these guys excited about playing. And he in New York, he talked about every kid wants this. When you're a ballpark, going to Yankee Stadium, big crowd, they're all booing you. You want this. Well, at least he wants that. And he got it. So, you look at how he played. All right, what kind of series did he have? Not great. He was 6 for 31, batted 194. He had a homer and 3 RBIs. He had a
Barely
double.
faced a right-hander the whole series, I don't
Yeah,
think.
that's a weakness. Now they're gonna have to deal with that because during the year he hit 173 against lefties, and so that will be a thing. They could really use another right-handed bat with some pop. I know they have Oscar, but see, Oscar proved he could play the outfield. Um, so you would like to get a first baseman who's a right-handed bat with some power who could DH, and then sometimes maybe you platoon Naylor. And also, I just think it's really hard to play Naylor all the time with uh, that leg thing. That was a career-threatening injury. And anybody who's ever had the type of surgery where they're putting nuts and bolts and rods into any part of your body, you get a weather leg and all kinds of stuff going on with that.
And you always think about it. It's
Yep.
always there. So, all right, Terry, anything else on the Guardians? As a
Other
way of
than
wrap
then,
up.
I'm just kind of I want to look at Naylor's regular stats because now you hit regular season stats. Now he hit 20 homers this year and 449 at bats. He batted 256, 771 OPS, and that's really nice. Let's see how bad the splits were if my memory is correct. In terms of he hit 173 against lefties, so it was that was a problem for him, and he had 283, so he pounds righties. Not only hit 173 against lefties, David, he had 1 home run in 110 at bats. So that's just tough matchups for him.
Well, again, it was some season, as you wrote about after the game last night, Terry. I think you really made some good points just about how far this franchise has come. And Tito said after the game, we think this is just the beginning for us. And if you look at their roster, I think that aside from Jose Ramirez, Miles Straw, and Clase, who are all signed to multi-year deals, everybody else is either under team control for next season or going to arbitration, which is kind of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, they'll be able to keep this core together for a while, it looks like.
Yeah, the big decision will be, and who knew that they would have discussion of do they offer Rosario some type of longer term contract? Jose wants it, and my feeling is Francona does too, because you can say, yeah, they got all these shortstop prospects in that, but if you look at Ahmad during the last 3 full seasons, I always throw out the 20-year because what do you make of 60 games? So throw that out. But the last 3 full seasons, he hits like 283 and like a 720 OPS, and he hits like about 14 homers. He's so consistent. I mean, it's the same numbers. That's what you know you're going to get. And then when you have him on your team, he's a little like Rajay Davis. Remember how Davis was hustling all the time and brings those intangibles. And you may look at the numbers and go, I don't know, but it's not pure numbers. And that is one of the things that Terry Francona brought to this very analytic-driven organization was clubhouse chemistry and the fact that you do need a certain type of guys on your team over 162 games to make it work. And when Francona came in with that, it's a little different than some of the other managers they could have had, just didn't have the same gravitas as Francona. So that'll be that. But really, that when you talk about this, as opposed to in the past, are they going to trade Jose? Are they going to trade this guy? No, there's nobody to talk about trading other than I don't think they're trading Bieber with 2 years left to go. But you never know. I guess it would be if. Remember, Drew Rosenhaus is his agent, and Rosenhaus hired a guy from Scott Boros' agency to run the baseball part of his operation. And by far, Bieber is their biggest name client. So that could be a very tough sign.
All right, just going back to Rosario, he is arbitration eligible for 2023, and then he's unrestricted after 2023. So just to frame that, but certainly an entertaining season, and boy, some real memories there for fans that I think they were not expecting at the beginning of the season. So, all right, Terry, let's take a break here. We are going to get into the Browns when we get back. Lots to talk about there. I want to get your thoughts on how they fix this. And we got some good Hey Terry questions. Also, the Cavs open tonight. They are in Toronto. We're going to get into that a little bit. And we got some good Hey Terry questions. So we'll be right back on Terry's Talkin'. We're back on Terry's Talkin'. David Campbell and Terry Pluto. Terry, the Cavaliers play their season opener tonight in Toronto. It's a 7:30 tip-off against the Raptors, and then they play at Chicago, another road game on Saturday at 8. Then they're home Sunday for the home opener against Washington. That one is at 7. Well, what are you expecting from the Cavaliers this year? A lot of people are very excited about what they can be with this young core. What are you seeing? And I don't know if you want to make a season prediction for how many games or playoff, how far they'll go, but what are you seeing?
Okay, a couple of things. Number one, I'll ask you this. I would say that since the year 2000, let's just do that, there's been only 2 seasons that were more anticipated than this one. Would have been one when LeBron was drafted in 2002 or whatever that was. And then the other is when LeBron returned in 2014. And then I would say this one. Because even with LeBron after that, but the initial excitement is that. Now, secondly, and I'm going to write about this, I hadn't thought about it, the Mitchell trade, what he brings to the Cavs. This reminds me a little bit of when Wayne Embry traded Kevin Johnson, who ended up being an all-star, and Tyrone Corbin, and a first-round pick and some other stuff for Larry Nance, because he felt that he had a young core with Brad Daugherty, Mark Price, Craig Elo, that group, and he thought, and Hot Rod Williams, they needed a veteran who could just take them to another level. And while Nance did not win the title here, He was part of the team that went to the Final Four in '92. The last time they won a round of the playoffs without LeBron was the 1993 Cavaliers. So that's a key part. And Nance was right in the prime of his career. He was in his late 20s. Now Mitchell's even younger than that. So I'm excited. I want to see what it looks like. But I was very encouraged in some of the preseason games I saw, and I was glad to see JB played those guys together. I'm talking about Mitchell and Garland played them together a fair amount in the preseason, because they need to play. You can't just do it in scrimmages and things.
Yeah, there's no substitution for game competition, and what is it going to look like tonight? When it's for real and the chemistry is starting to be established. I think that's going to be something that fans are really going to be watching about how this
But
backcourt. And there's only one basketball, as you know, so
you'll like this, David, because I'm totally anti-betting or whatever. But this is a warning, and I learned this from a guy a long time ago. Anybody that bets opening day in the NBA, they should just throw their money right out the window. Crazy stuff happens, and the teams tend to look ragged. So if you remember, go back to LeBron's first game when he came back. I forgot who they played. I keep thinking it's the Knicks, but no matter. They were awful that night, and he was awful. There was all this hype, and I remember sitting there going, "This looks like the team that was here before LeBron." But I just think even though they're pros, they've been around, they get fired up for this stuff. And as you said too, when the ball goes up and they're playing for real, it changes a lot.
So how far can this team go? How many games you see them winning? I don't know if you want to put a number on it,
No,
but
I did. I wrote it Sunday,
oh,
51.
that's right. That's right. 51. Yep.
51 and 31. I got them winning around the playoffs. Then I went through all my awful predictions so that anybody who looks at that number would not really exactly shouldn't bet a dime on it. So that was, but I think it's hard to win 50 games in the NBA. Now, I kind of toss out some of the LeBron teams because LeBron is he's a player of a generation. And you just don't see that to there. But like the last time they won 50 games without LeBron was that 93 team with Lenny Wilkens as coach. They won 53 that year. They had a couple of seasons in there with Mark Price and go on where they won 57. Now, I was on the Cavs beat for the Beacon Journal then, and it showed me really how hard it was to win over 50 games. When you don't have a flat out superstar like Michael Jordan or LeBron or somebody that you're and it turned out you'll be facing that guy sometimes because they were in that Central Division, which at that point was pretty good with the Bulls, and remember the Pistons were coming on the other side of their championships there with Dumars and those guys, but they were good too, and it was they were at the end of the bad boys. It was fun. And I think that's how it's going to be this time. We remember how the last year we had a taste of Cavs fun. I think there's going to be more of that. I just want to see if they can keep their defensive focus because I've been told I'm wrong about this by a couple NBA people that I respect. They're in front offices for other teams because I was saying I thought Markkanen was underrated, that he helped not only being tall on the defensive end, but his 3-point shooting was critical to them. And it isn't like when you bring in Kevin Love that you try to have to hide him defensively on some of these guys. Markkanen would go out and try to defend anybody. So I think he will be missed. That doesn't negate the good feelings about the trade, but I'm just saying that helped give them that big team identity and that 3-point shooting.
So Chris Fedor, our colleague who covers the Cavs, has had a lot of really interesting stuff the last few days previewing the team. He wrote a really good takeout yesterday on Evan Mobley, and I was kind of a little taken aback when I was reading it because they're really working with him. And after every practice, the coaches go up to him and they end every session by saying HOF, Hall of Fame. And they think that not only can he help the Cavs get deep into the playoffs over the next 3 to 5 years and maybe to the NBA Finals, they are seeing him as a Hall of Fame talent. And I was like, really? Okay, interesting. Is Evan Mobley a Hall of Fame talent potentially? Terry, what do you think about those aspirations and his potential?
I just hate when they do that. Even though if you could sit there and say, boy, he's got the same. I mean, at the same age, I remember seeing Chris Bosh as a rookie and Mobley as a rookie. I'm going to throw out Garnett because he came out of high school and he struggled his first year. But all right, if you put him in there, all three, I liked Mobley better. That's right now, though. But what those guys
What
did,
about compared to Giannis? I mean, the names that were dropped in Chris's
yeah, I saw
story
that.
included him too.
I mean, he's coming from Greece. Basketball is so hard. They come from all over. They're different ages. Mobley seemed to have more polish than Giannis at that point after the first year. But Giannis was, just exceptional in terms of how he drove himself. Actually, all of those guys. And we would be more impressed with Bosh had he played longer. Remember, his career ended prematurely because of, I forgot what, his blood clots or something. And secondly, the last number of years of his career, he was the odd man out. Talk to Kevin Love how that feels when that was with Wade and LeBron. So his stats weren't quite as great as it would have been. But yes, but I don't. But the thing is, I'm not Bickerstaff. I'm not there with Mobley. I don't know Mobley at all. And maybe that's the best way to motivate him. I want to say this, though. Chris wrote two magnificent stories. Not good, not great, magnificent. The story, if you haven't read, on fixing Okoro's shot, we'll see how it works out. But I felt I had just moved into the space age of coaching compared to, I remember when I was covering the beat, and you know how you fixed the guy's shot? You had one coach working with him, and he just worked on the shot. And they now get your left hand a little more, and they might have had some video with it, but they didn't have this NOAA thing that measured the arc of the shots and all this other stuff. I'll be very curious to see if it works. But it also told me there's a reason, David, why the 3-point shooting keeps going up and up and up, the percentages. And I think a lot of this stuff is helping that. And as a grumpy old man, I hate to admit it because I still like, the old getting into the gym. But they are getting into the gym. And he's still taking a couple hundred shots, only is being measured and taught in a new way.
In real time. Yeah, you're right, Terry. That Okoro story was just fascinating. This NOAA thing, it's NOAH. It's a basketball real time machine. It sits under the basket. It has facial recognition. This is all in Chris's story, as you
Yeah.
pointed out. So it knows when Isaac Okoro is shooting jumpers, and it's like, all right, Isaac Okoro is shooting. The ball goes up, and it says 46 degrees, 44 degrees, 42 degrees. Like every shot that goes up, it is telling the coaches and Isaac Okoro in real time what shot angle his shot is going up. And did you know this, that 45 degrees is the perfect angle
I
at
didn't
which the
know
ball goes
anything
through
in
the
that
hoop?
story. None of that. I didn't know any of that stuff. That's why I
I'm
said it
like,
was magnificent. Even if felt sometimes I was back in calculus class where I didn't do particularly well, I was still going, wow. Now, I hope it works. Although I'm glad also in there they mentioned that he sometimes, which now the layman noticed, he doesn't, his left hand kind of floats around the ball. It isn't in the same spot all the time. The great shooters are able to catch and shoot with their hands in the same spot all the time. I had never thought other than you would think, boy, that shot's a line drive, or that shot looks to me like it has too much arc on it. That was about as far as I ever went till Noah showed up in my life the other day.
Noah. Yeah, I mean, I always thought, like, all right, if you stand above the hoop and drop the ball in, that's the best angle. So you should shoot it like
Yeah.
80 degrees, but
So,
45. Noah says
but
45.
it's
So
a critical thing because they will not. And Chris also had it there. So basically, he was the most open guy in the NBA. The play, they have that, and I like that. That's kind of interesting too. How far is a player from you when you take your shot? Is he 3 feet away, or 4 feet, or 6 feet? And they just didn't guard him. Well, they're not going to guard him this year either. Now, he had a 6-week span, I remember last year, because I remember looking this up, where he shot about 40% on threes. I'm talking about Okoro. And that really helped him. But it was like from February to the end of March, and it just went away. He didn't shoot him particularly well before, and could hardly shoot him at all after. So we'll see how this works out. But they are not going to, whoever that other small forward is, they're not going to guard him. And I would prefer Okoro to start with the other big four as they are now, because he doesn't need the ball. I don't know. Are they starting Levert, or is JB Bickerstaff still acting like this is a big secret now?
Yeah, he's Chris Fedor tried to ask me in practice, who you asking? I mean, who you
Yeah.
starting at small forward? And JB said, "Nice try, buddy."
Yeah.
So I think
Well,
he's guarding it, but we'll know soon enough. So
I mean, they have plenty of times to figure out their first two
and
their
really, Terry, does
rotations.
it matter? I mean, starters are starters, but like minutes are what matter, right? And we'll see who
Yes,
gets the
and
minutes, right?
combinations matter though, David.
Yeah.
Who is with who? That's where he needs to figure it out. If you go back and look at their first two games last year, they lost. They gave up like 130 points, high 20, 128, and they were like half in on the big lineup. And then after that, and they were shooting ridiculous threes. And JB sat down with the coaching staff and said, "We are going to get killed playing this way." And they went more deep into the defense, the big lineup, more ball handling instead of just the first time you see an open shot from halfway from Parma, take it. They just stopped that, which I'm like, good. And then they remember how the fans felt like the Guardians are playing real baseball when the Cavs are at their best. They're saying they're playing real basketball. This is the kind of basketball that I remember, and that's what they need to stay with here. But they will. I mean, I know this. If I'm playing the Cavs, I don't care who's the small forward. I'm not guarding him, and I'm hoping he takes more shots than he should, because that means Mitchell and Garland and the big guys aren't shooting.
Going to be a lot of open shots for those guys, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. So,
By the
all
way,
right,
I want to ask you, David, what
yeah,
do you say? I want 51 and one. I mean, since I'm the guy that predicted they would win 46 games until left the first time and they won 19, you have the right to make a prediction with my record.
yeah, I think 50 wins is about where I'm at, Terry. And last year they had some weird COVID stuff happen, the injuries at the end. I think 50 wins is kind of where I'm at. I think you're right on it. And it's interesting that they're trying to teach Okoro how to shoot better, and he's a good defensive player. And then they've got Levert, who's a pretty good offensive player, and they're trying to get him to commit to defense. So they've kind of got two different pieces of the puzzle that are trying to meet in the middle in a way. So
And by
that'll
the
be
way, a guy who could still be valuable to them, and one of the Cavs assistants told me this. Well, he mentioned two guys, because he said we still like the big lineup, and he mentioned Dean Wade, who could
6'9".
help them. He's 6'9", and he said he's kind of a poor man's marketing. And he said, don't forget Kevin Love. We could put him out there with second team guys, disguise him a little bit on defense. And, Kevin had a really good year. The coaches dropped the ball. I don't care how they try to explain that Atlanta game at the end of the year where he played only 11 minutes and 3 in the second half. Well, he was getting put in the pick and roll and he was having some trouble. They were having trouble putting the ball in the basket with everybody. They almost killed Darius Garland. And they weren't stopping the pick and roll anyway, whoever the heck else was in there. So sometimes, and I'm more of a defensive guy in the NBA, but there are times when you just say, all right, I'm going to live with Kevin, because I'm going to see if he can hit a couple threes real quick, especially with Kevin keeping his attitude good and staying healthy. I mean, I'm fired up. I want to see it. I mean, I want to watch this. When Donovan Mitchell wants to, I remember Mike Fratello was the first one to tell me this. He says, when Mitchell wants to get to a spot on the floor, he'll get there and he'll get a shot off. And he compared him a little bit to Joe Dumars. And the reason Mike
Oh,
comes
I
with
like that. That's a good comparison. Yeah.
even more authority than normal on this, because Mike's was a tremendous coach. He did the Clippers, and he's done the Clippers the last few years broadcast. So he's in the West. He sees Mitchell and these guys more. So he brings more of a opinion on that besides just a basketball former coach from a distance.
All right, Terry, we got to move on. We're going to go from a team where expectations are high and people are fired up to a team that's
Where
struggling
they want to fire people.
and fans are disillusioned. So I don't even know where to start with the Browns this week. There's a lot to get into. What are you seeing from the Browns, and how do they fix this?
The
Or can
defense
they?
the defense is a disaster, and schematically there's huge problems. I don't know enough to know other than it reminds me of what the great basketball ref Earl Strom said to me. I asked him one time about how NBA has its own kind of way of like what's traveling, what isn't. He goes, I can't explain it, but I know it when I see it. And I can't explain what's wrong with their schemes exactly, but I know it when I see it, because they don't defend anything for a consistent amount of time. There are major breakdowns, and players continue to look confused. And there is talent on defense. Maybe it's overrated, but there's still quite a bit of talent on defense. And I'm not big on firing coaches. That's not my style. But I wrote on Sunday, they either got to change something schematically, change the coordinator or something to pretend that they just have to, quote unquote, work harder. No, they got to work much different.
Yeah, they really focused on fundamentals last week, and I think the tackling was a little better on Sunday. But I mean, to me, Terry, there's three things on the defense that I'm seeing this season. And you mentioned the scheme. Number one, if it's a bad scheme, it's on the coaches and Joe Woods.
Mm-hmm.
If it's talent, which I think is part of it, especially in the interior defensive line, like that's on Andrew Berry. But
Mm-hmm.
the most concerning thing that I saw the other day, and I'm going to go and watch the game again before the week's out. Some of those
By the
guys
way,
on defense.
I'm stopping you.
Yeah.
2 Excedrin before you watch that game.
All right, I'll write that down. The doctor ordered. Terry's orders.
It's just for preventative defense is what I'm doing for that migraine that is going to come if you're going to stare at that game again.
But the referees in the NFL talk about when a receiver's forced out of bounds, he was happy to go out of bounds, right? I look at the Browns defense and it's like they're happy to be blocked sometimes. Some of these guys get one hat on them and it's like, all right, well, I'm blocked. And they're not playing hard all the time. And I saw that more than ever in Sunday's loss, and that's concerning in terms of this coaching staff. Did you see any of that, or what did you think?
I just saw a very lackadaisical effort, a defeatism, sense of doom. And I wrote this. I don't know for a fact, but I've been around sports long enough. Baseball's different because there's so much one-on-one matchups. But I've seen it in basketball, and I've seen it in football. When you reach a point in the game where the players are not buying into whatever scheme or plays are being called. And I sensed that early on, even in that New England game when it was fairly close, that they just did not seem to, whatever they wanted to do, the guys were not all in on it. I mean, that's where you get the kind of effort you're talking about.
Well, I mean, they played a lot of zone early in the season, and Joe Woods, I think he's been playing a lot more man, and they played more man on Sunday, and they couldn't do that well either. So I just there's a lot of problems there. And
all right, let me thought, because I really do. You look at this stuff deeper than I do. It's just more in your wheelhouse than where the other two sports I feel stronger. They have these fast guys, correct? Or allegedly fast linebackers
on defense, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Allegedly fast linebackers, defensive backs, but they don't seem to create any pressure. I'm not just talking about the pass rush, just general pressure on whoever they're facing. If part of the reason they went out, and Andrew Berry told me this in one of our preview discussions before the season, was to have these linebackers, because so much he believes that is not only going side to side, to stop the runs and Lamar Jackson and that, but just a lot of the jet sweeps, those things you see. But he also thought just having these kind of athletes would give you the ability to go and really go after the quarterback more, just create more pressure defense, like in basketball. Just even if they say pick them up 3/4 court, make them uncomfortable. That's what I was looking to say. The Browns defense does not make the other team look uncomfortable. It seems like whatever they want to do, they do.
Well, and Bill Belichick is famous for taking away the opponent's most dangerous players. And you look
Yeah.
on that defense, and Myles Garrett is being double teamed more than anybody else in football right now.
Mm-hmm.
You double team Myles Garrett, and there's nobody else on that defense you have to worry about right now. Not one person,
I don't
especially
know if
with Denzel Ward out.
I don't know if the answer is a blitz more or whatever, just something. And I will say this about what Bill did to poor Jacoby Brissett. By the way, I think these guys that come into the league under Bill Belichick, and that's their first coach, he's their daddy, the good daddy or bad daddy. You like him or you didn't like him, but he is your first exposure to pro ball. And when you face him later on, I think you really want to stick it to him. And that. Meantime, there's a fear that he is the grumpy genius, and he does know you probably as well or better than anyone else. And then you had a coach that came out and said, what we need is a offense built upon throwing 8 passes in the first half to tight ends, a variety of tight ends, I may add, and only give the ball to Nick Chubb 8 times because we know Bill is known for taking away passes to the middle of the field, so we're going to throw passes down the sidelines to tight ends. And Bill's probably going, thank God they're doing that. This is exactly what we want. We don't want Amari Cooper over the middle. We don't want. I'm like, try it. Why are you going to make Jacoby Brissett trying to make that throw to Farrell Brown? I mean, he wasn't fair. I mean, Farrell Brown actually is not a bad player. There's a reason he's
And he was
stuck
open.
around the way. And he was open, but it was a tough pass. He's rolling out. He's trying to heave it 50 yards. I mean, I can't finish the sentence.
Yeah, well, no, you're right. He takes you out of what you do best, and then you have to do something else, and the Browns couldn't do something else.
But he did it on the first. That was his play number 2, wasn't it?
It was.
He didn't
play
take
number
you
2.
out of anything. It just started. I mean, it's just the game just began. What about a sweep to Chubb?
All right, Terry. Lots to go.
The first pass was to Harrison Bryant, another tight end. I thought these were the tight end drills, not a game.
All right, Terry, we're running a little long here. We got to
Okay.
get moving on. So your faith column this week, usually you pick one topic and kind of go deep on it. I thought it was an interesting approach this week. You said you wanted to share with people 10 things that can help you be content. And some people might not really take away all 10. They might pick 3 or 5 or 7 that they think can help their lives. But how did you end up with this topic, and kind of tell people a little bit about what ended up in this column, which will appear Saturday on cleveland.com and Sunday in the Plain Dealer?
Yes, I'm sorry. The column has 10 points. But the main thing is, first of all, people confuse happiness with content. Happiness oftentimes is dictated by circumstances. Contentment is, for example, when I went to see John Adams and the drummer in the nursing home, John's on dialysis 3 times a week. He's dealing with heart issues, all kinds of problems. If he was just purely unhappiness, he would be unhappy. I mean, there's a lot wrong with him. But content, he's still working hard to try to get better, but he is focusing on the A's that are nice to him, the cards that come in, the Guardians on TV, that people still remember he played the drum. He's staying in that thing. So you could be content in the middle of a lot of pain and struggle. But if our view of life is simply based on what makes me happy, we're going to be unhappy a lot. So I write a lot about relationships, and it gets pretty involved, but it's a nice thing is 10 quick things. And that's coming Saturday and then Sunday in the paper.
Yeah, and the one that I really like, and we've talked about this before, is the argument worth the relationship? And especially given how divided the country is. I know people who are on Facebook, and somebody says something that rubs them the wrong way, and they unfriend them and they never talk to them again. And it's just, I think you quoted a phrase that your dad used to say, "Is that the hill you want to die on?" Right?
Yeah. It's exactly it.
You've got years of relationship that you just let slip away because of one thing that somebody said. And,
I mean, if you're going to define a relationship with how they are political, you're probably eliminating half the country.
Yep, never more true than now. So,
and by the way, not all these things need to be discussed. There's plenty of other things. Talk about your kids. Talk about the person that's been sick. Talk about all kinds of stuff. Complain about the Browns. That'll bring you together
for 3 hours.
Yeah.
All right. We've got some Hey Terry questions. Terry, let's see how we're doing on time here. All right, we're not too bad. We got a couple of minutes. This one's from Howard Ross, and Howard writes to say, "Hey Terry, What did the Guardians' DHs hit this year, and how did they compare with the rest of the league's contenders? It sure seemed like we had a bunch of guys, beginning with Reyes, that not only couldn't hit the long ball, they couldn't hit at all. I have to think that a really good DH would have put us over the top, what Reyes was supposed to be. Thanks for your consideration. Then again, that's from Howard Ross. Terry, DHs and the Guardians.
Great question. Better than I even thought, or it was worse than I even thought. In terms of the DHs in the playoffs, they hit three for 28 with a homer. During the regular season, which is more indicative, only Oakland's was worst. They hit 217, 587 OPS, and they had the fewest amount of home runs, 8, from the DH position. So I think that's definitely something they're going to look at, because you just need a guy that can hit, and as I suggested, maybe play a little first base. And the Reyes fallen apart. And by the way, he hit for a little while with the Cubs and then collapsed there. That was a big problem for this team, because had he hit his 30 home runs, which he had hit in the 2 previous seasons where they played 162 games, it would have been a different team.
Oh yeah, and just imagine this past series if they would have had somebody with that kind of pop. All right, Terry, we got one more here. This one, I know we're right after the season, but this question came in, so I'm gonna read it. It's from Andrew from Glen Ellen, Virginia, and he says, "Hey Terry, I hate to even think about this, but if Tito decides to retire after this dream season ends, who do you think will be the Guardians' next manager? I'm going to go with Sandy Alomar Jr., who edges out DeMarlo Hale for the job." Sorry, I stumbled over that. Andy Tracy is my sleeper selection, and if you want drama, my outside the organization choice is Kevin Cash from Tampa Bay, with the Rays receiving a player or two in return. If Tito decides to retire, I'd love to see the Guardians or Tito agree to a job title, such as special advisor to the GM or something like that, to keep Francona in the organization. Love the podcast, as always. And then again, that's Andrew from Glen Ellen, Virginia. Thanks for that, Andrew. What do you think, Terry?
We'll work a little backwards. Tito will be a Cleveland front office guy the rest of his life, regardless of what happens, because first of all, they have a lot of consultants if you look at that. Secondly, they love him and want his input. Now, his contract is up, not that he's going anywhere, because actually is going somewhere. He goes to Cleveland Clinic, where it's kind of like they overhaul the whole car and they look at everything physically to see what he can do. And Francona is such a honorable guy, Dave. I mean, he could have insisted, like, I want a long-term contract or whatever, but he's like, no, I'm going to let this go out to make sure I'm healthy. I mean, he's remarkable. He just is. I know I use that word a couple times with him because it's true. Okay. I think the next manager will be DeMarlo Hale. He's been clearly in training the last couple of years. They discovered, and Sandy too, Sandy Alomar, people think, well, he's just kind of coaching first base. His real job is coaching the catchers, game planning with the catchers. There's a reason that the Cleveland catchers are great at blocking balls in the dirt, running the game. That's Sandy's. It's kind of like being an offensive line coach or something. It's like one of these specialized areas, and he does love that. And I think he found that being interim manager, and that it just, there's a lot of headaches with it. You spend a lot of time at the front office. You spend a lot of time at the media. It's not just being down there and coaching. I remember him talking to me about in spring training about teaching when they had Carlos Santana as a young catcher on. I mean, he's showing me how to block the balls and this and Santana. I mean, this was his passion. It was clearly what he loves. So that's why I think it'll be Hale, and I think it'll be fine with Sandy because he likes the job he has.
And he's one of the best at it, as the results have shown. So, all right, Terry, thanks for that. Really interesting stuff. And thanks for all the questions. If you want to get a question to us for next week's podcast, you can send it to sports@cleveland.com by email. And also, if you want to find Terry on his Facebook page, that's another good place. And we'll try and get your question on next week's podcast. That'll do it, right, Terry?
That'll do it. And I do have an appearance coming up. I keep forgetting. November 2nd, 6:30 p.m., the Worcester Library. November 2nd, 6:30 p.m., Worcester Library. All right. David will be there. You'll be driving all the way from the west side to Worcester, I'm sure.
I have to get to one of these. I tell you now that things are hopefully going to slow down here in November, we'll see. But all right, that'll do it. I'm going to take a couple of Excedrin and go watch the Browns game again, Terry.
My condolences.
Have a good weekend. We'll catch you next week on Terry's Talkin.